Well, g'day, and welcome to week 3 in our series on the gospel. What is the good news? And this week we're looking at gospel practices. The basic idea is what God has done to us, God wants to do through us. So what's happened for us, we need to make available to others. So throughout the New Testament, we hear about this idea that the gospel is something that breaks down walls. That through the work of Christ on the cross, we are brought closer to God and to one another. So this idea of reconciliation is very important. Last Sunday, we were reading that passage from Corinthians where Paul says, if you're ambassadors of Christ, if you represent him, then this ministry of reconciliation is yours. So I'm going to introduce you to a young fellow that I met down in New South Wales when I was at the Saltbush gathering. And he's part of a church where they have a particular passage from Luke chapter 5 that has become something of a touchstone for them. The idea quite simply is, we will do whatever it takes to get people closer to Jesus. If there's a gatekeeper, we'll pull a panel out of the fence. If there are too many religious folk all gathered around, we'll elbow them out of the way. If we have to pull the roof off, we'll do it. Whatever it takes to get people closer to Jesus. And then it's up to Jesus what he will do. It's from Luke chapter 5.
One day, while he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting nearby. They had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was with him to heal. Just then some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a bed. They were trying to bring him in and lay him before Jesus, but finding no way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and let him down with his bed through the tiles into the middle of the crowd in front of Jesus. When he saw their faith, he said,
"Friend, your sins are forgiven you."
Then the scribes and the Pharisees began to question,
Who is this who is speaking blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone?
When Jesus perceived their questionings, he answered them,
Why do you raise such questions in your hearts? Which is easier to say, "Your sins are forgiven you," or to say, "Stand up and walk"? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins,
he said to the one who was paralyzed,
I say to you, stand up and take your bed and go to your home.
Immediately he stood up before them, took what he had been lying on, and went to his home, glorifying God. Amazement seized all of them, and they glorified God and were filled with awe, saying,
We have seen strange things today.
So folks, opportunity to introduce Daniel Mossfield. Daniel, not Dan.
Yes, Daniel. Yeah.
And I met Daniel, as I said, down in New South Wales at a thing called the Saltbush gathering. So this passage from Luke 5, I've suggested it's a touchstone. Is it a Lectio Divina for you guys, that this is a story that you have kind of made your own in your community?
Yeah, it's a story which we whisper, I would describe, in our community. So I heard this passage preached on by the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III in the States, who's a black preacher from Chicago. And the way he told it was not whispering, but it captured my imagination pretty heavily. And so when I came back to Australia, I just started to offer it into spaces because I actually thought in hearing that story, I actually heard the life of our community. And so I started to offer it back to the community to see what would happen. And what I've in turn heard is others whispering it back. And starting to tell the story to each other and to bring it up as a bit of a touchstone when they're reflecting on, why is this happening in the life of our community, or what should we be doing in response to this situation? And I hear others starting to bring it up, so that's exciting.
That is, and folks from the Bells community, we have often said, Luke 10, go into the village where I intend to go, and it never does us any harm after 6 years to come back and renew our connection to something of this gospel story. I wish I could have a name that ended in the third or junior or something.
Yes.
There's just got nothing going for it. But so in this, I think what I'm hearing is whatever it takes to bring people nearer to Jesus, first thing. And then Jesus will do whatever it is he's going to do. That's actually not our problem. Have I got two parts to this story reasonably in focus?
I think so. And I would probably add a third part, which is that all of us have a mat. I think that all of us have a story, a background, a history that we bring with us. And there's a degree to which that's a good thing, but there are aspects of our story, our background, that trap us as well. We can equally be victims to our mat as we can be empowered by them. But so all of us have a mat. So, if you will, there's sort of three human parts we identify in our community with this story. There's three places we put ourselves, and then there's a fourth character or a fourth place in Jesus, which is the central one. But so we talk about that all of us have a mat and a story, and we can feel trapped there. And there are times we need a community to carry us. There are actually times we need a community to pick us up and help us on the way because we don't have the strength to do it ourselves. That also means that there's times that our neighbor is stuck on their mat and needs somebody to carry them. So we move around the story. And so as a grace community, as a community, we've said that we are a community that will commit to picking people up and carrying them when they're stuck on their mat. And our image for carrying them is that we want to put them before Jesus, whatever that looks like, whatever that happens to look like. And we can't prejudice. What I like about this story and what Otis Moss pointed out was they don't ask Jesus to heal the man. There's no expectation of what's going to happen. It's all we know is we've got to get him there. We've got to put him there. And we've heard about this Jesus and we just trust that's important. And we don't know why it's important, but it's important. So we put him there.
And one of the things I love in that, I was reading through, and one of the opening verses, it just sort of setting the scene, as Luke's setting the scene, he says, and the power of the Lord was with him, Jesus, to heal. The power of this is with Jesus.
Yes.
And we just come into this and go, Lord.
Yeah. And that's radically countercultural when we live in a self-help culture that says we fix it all. And
you're too young to be described as middle-aged, but when you're an older middle-aged bloke who fixes things, oh yeah, you're absolutely right. That's just a cultural. That's just the way we roll. Yeah,
it is
stuff.
We do. We are fixers. What was it? There was an Australian politician who said that famously. I'm a fixer. I fix things.
I knew some guys in the painters and dockers and a biker gang who used to say similar things, but that's probably just a reflection of politics in Australia. Verse 19 was another one that grabbed me. Finding no way to bring him in because of the crowd.
Yes.
What are the ways that you think we, even as church, as religious people, actually get in the way?
Well, and I think especially the religious people, it is precisely the religious people who are in the building with Jesus. We're told it's the religious leaders and the authorities who are there with him in this story. Because there's a religious thing happening, there's a God thing happening. So of course the religious people are there. That stands to reason. What doesn't occur to them is that maybe the non-religious people want to be there too. Or maybe it's precisely those people who need to be there for whom this event is actually happening. So my community, the Grace community, is made up of people who would identify more with the men on the mat on the outside than they'd identify with the established church. They're people who have been told they don't belong and aren't welcome before. And some of that's been explicit and some of that's been implicit. So I think I mentioned at Saltbush that I've got members of my community who are part of the LGBTI community. I've got members of my community who have mental health issues or disability. And I've got a lot of people who are low socioeconomic. And church wasn't designed for them, at least church as it's established. It was particularly, and in the Uniting Church, we're pretty good at comfortable middle class church. And when they go and have gone, they've felt they've not belonged. Maybe it's been a message they heard from the pulpit at the front that explicitly said they didn't belong. Or maybe it's been the clique of people talking to each other and not. I spoke to someone recently in my community here who said everyone's really polite and lovely and kind, but they don't think to invite me to anything. It can be that kind of simple.
And that is hard to hear, Dan. It is, and yet, yeah, it's true. You know, it is true, and that is part of a whole lot of things for us. But if we're going to be people who enable others to experience what we have experienced, then we really have to confront that and break it down. And it seems such a simple thing, but yeah, like I was having coffee. Went for a motorcycle ride with a couple of mates on Saturday, and one of the blokes was saying, you know, I want to engage with my neighbours, and I just need to do it. You know, it really is. Don't overthink this. It's not that hard. Just do it. And I think so often that is the case. We go, oh well, there's like this, that, the other.
Yeah,
Just
I think we make the gospel into a concept, and the gospel is connection. So we turn it into an idea, and I can't possibly share the gospel, and I can't reach out, and I can't connect with others because I don't have the right answers. I don't know how to tell the story. And it's as simple as connection. it's the man is connected with Jesus. He's in front of Jesus. It's just human to human connection. There's nothing more complicated than that. There's not a profession of faith. There's not a thesis or a doctoral dissertation that the man has to write before he gets his healing. It's just a connection.
Last week we were spending some time in Michael Frost's stuff about living questionable lives.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a life that people go, well, what's going on? Well, then there it is. That is that simple point of connection, and then get the gospel clear and tell it. And, you know, we'll see what happens after that. One of the things that actually you've brought me to is verses 22 to 24, where they say to him, but, you know, who are you that you should think you can do this? Only God can do this, and that's blasphemy and yada, yada. And Jesus kind of says, well, you know, hang on. You're overthinking this. How complicated do you want to make this? Is it easier for me to say, be well, or to forgive sins? Let's just do it. And another thing that I want to explore a little bit in my own life is, how do I overcomplicate this for Jesus when he seems to be saying, don't overthink it. I can forgive sins and I can salve you. Just let me do it.
And how much of that overcomplication comes from the fact, because again, it's the religious people making that statement. It's the good churchgoers, it's the life members, that are making that statement. And I suspect that actually at the heart of that statement is what happens when God acts in a way we don't expect, or what happens when God doesn't meet our limited framework of what we think God should be or should do. And that's this overcomplication, I suspect, to a degree. So there is a degree of needing to be open to the possibility of God doing the simple. And were this a sermon, that's the line I would have just repeated as I said it, because that felt helpful as I said it. Letting God do the simple. The complication for my community there in Grace is that we don't see ourselves as that. We see ourselves as the man outside on the mat, and that everybody else is the problem getting in our way. What I like about how we use this story is we then actually try to invite to think about, actually, but all of us have expectations of what we think God does or doesn't do. And when do they start becoming the barrier to others? And also to ourselves, because then we miss out on seeing this thing that God's doing. Instead of marveling at the fact that a man has got up and walked, we question and we argue, and we miss out on the wonder.
speaking with Daniel Mossfield. Reverend Daniel Mossfield is at Crookwell in New South Wales, and if you're like me, you would need to look that up on a map. Apart from Goulburn, it's in that part of the world. And if you're a Queenslander and you're asking why I'm wearing blue, that's all other stuff anyway. But in that whole thing about when God does the simple and the amazing, that actually brings me to the last part of the passage, verses 25 and 26. It seems to me like a string of emotions, or at least things that are emotional in themselves. Jesus does this thing and everybody glorifies God, like, wow, that's a fabulous thing. They are amazed. And then they go home and they say, we have seen strange things. And I wonder, it's not a neat and tidy ending. Luke sometimes leaves us hanging, often gives us a fairly, here's how that works. But this is not a neat and tidy thing at all. How is it, as people who want to enable others to draw close to God, who want to be ambassadors for Christ in this ministry of reconciliation, breaking down walls and bringing people near, how difficult is it for us to be okay with strange things and an inconclusive thing, but it's glorious, it's amazing, it's just strange.
And I think it also depends on where you stand, because if I get to, I got to see this cool thing and now I get to go home back to my life and completely ignore it, that feels very different than the owner of the house in which all this happens, who has just had a hole cut in his roof. Yeah, that was amazing, but now I've got a hole in my roof. What are the ongoing implications for me? This is rather inconvenient, this gospel thing sometimes. Sometimes the action of God is going to leave me discomforted or inconvenienced. And I wonder about that in this range of emotions as well. I think all of us like the idea of God doing something cool over there. That's safe. We can wonder and awe, and it becomes sort of a spectacle. But when it comes in our own life, that's still there, but so is this complication of being disrupted. And our God is a disrupting God. And in the moment, that doesn't always feel like the good news.
Yeah. Last week, as we met Gary the Gerasene, and it was good news for him and pretty bad news for some other people. And I think in that is part of this thing too. Yes, the gospel is not a neat little package that we bring. And sometimes, yeah, I love that idea. It's certainly not a tidy ending. The guy's got a hole in his roof. And the religious people have gone back to Jerusalem and all over Judea because they had come to see something, but they've gone home. And even old mate with the mat, he goes to his home. So there is stuff that we must take with us from this experience, but somebody's going to be left with significant things to deal with in their life as God breaks in, and it's never going to be the same again.
And one of the really important parts is that Jesus doesn't tell the man to walk. Jesus tells him to get up and carry his mat. And he takes the mat home with him under his arm. He doesn't leave that baggage behind, like he doesn't leave the story behind, but he relates to it differently and he carries it with him. And it's in the act of carrying his story that he can now reveal to the world what God has done for him.
Daniel, that is a fabulous way to finish this. And I just want to really thank you for your time today. Really
My pleasure.
And if you don't mind, I hope that this will go a bit beyond our own community and perhaps through our presbytery and some other folks, just to give us another frame of how we think about being the people of God in the circumstance where we are, both as community, but as you just finished there, as individuals too, who carry our story with us into this ministry of reconciliation as Christ's ambassadors. Mate, have a great day. Bless your heaps.
Thank you very much.